In the Star Trek universe, the United Federation of Planets is an interstellar union of multiple planets under a single government, founded on the principles of liberty, equality, peace, justice, and progress. In the original series of the 60s and those of the 80s and 90s, the Federation is largely depicted as a place where poverty, greed, and war have all but disappeared. Neumann asserts in 1949 that in any culture, certain values and ideals emerge as absolute values, 100% good and thus ethical. In our modern Western era, one of our most important values is our individuality, and the idea that each of us is unique and important in our own right. We should therefore have equal rights and opportunities, including the freedom to choose our own unique path. Neumann posits that the most common way to create a society according to those values is to eliminate that which conflicts with them in order to achieve adaptation to the ethical ideal. This represents the old ethic. The two methods of doing this are suppression and repression. For the collective unconscious, both methods are disastrous. Neumann writes, in both cases, the collective has to pay for the false virtue of the individual. Suppression and still more repression result in an accumulation of suppressed or repressed contents in the unconscious. End quote. In addition, these contents do not remain unaltered, but instead start leading a life of their own, regress, and become more primitive and destructive than what was originally suppressed or repressed. The Borg, as symbol of the collective shadow in Star Trek, contains the extreme opposite of individuality. They do not exist as individuals, but instead are part of one big collective. Each Borg drone is connected to thousands of voices in their head, which allows them to communicate efficiently and work as one. When they are cut off from this hive mind, the Borg drones become anxious and will do anything to reconnect. The Borg's main purpose in life is to seek perfection, order, and efficiency. They show complete disrespect for even the most basic rights of individuals, most of all freedom. In order to reproduce and grow as a civilization, they assimilate other species. We have all heard them say, "We are the Borg. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile." They then proceed to inject their victims with nanoparticles to convert them into new Borg drones. Any knowledge and memories that were once part of these individuals then become part of the collective. Assimilation amounts to a forced total annihilation of the individual, a kind of zombification. It corresponds to losing all ego consciousness and being taken over entirely by the collective shadow. As is the case for unconscious shadow elements, the Borg are close to invincible. They have superior strength, technology, and travel capabilities, and when a new weapon or a defense is used on them, they collectively adapt to it within half a minute. Early on in the Star Trek narrative, the Borg are completely undifferentiated. They are a collective being of pure evil, and to be assimilated means you are lost forever. But gradually we learn more about the Borg, and we start to value the lives of drones whose link to the collective was severed. In an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called I, Borg, a lone and injured adolescent Borg survivor is found at a crash site. The crew wants to leave it to die, out of fear of being found and assimilated by the Borg. But Dr. Beverly Crusher insists that he should be saved. A plan is set into motion to develop a computer virus, upload it into the Borg drone, and then send the drone back to the collective to infect the Borg and cause total systems failure. The crew effectively rationalizes their plan to commit genocide by their need to survive and by the viewpoint that the Borg are a single collective being and that there's no one Borg who is more an individual than your arm or your leg. But from a psychodynamic point of view, They are using any justification to release their collective suppressed or repressed feelings of hatred, cruelty, violence, and general lack of respect for life forms and cultures that are different from their own. With the exception of Dr. Beverly Crusher, the crew is largely unaware that their proposed course of action is in fact contrary to their highest values. Neumann writes, all wars provide examples of this coexistence between a good conscience in the conscious mind and a breakthrough of the shadow on the level of action. From our one-sided point of view, there's no denying that the Borg in Star Trek represent pure evil. Our ego, when identified with our persona, completely disavows that there could be any part of us that resembles some part of the Borg. But as unconscious shadow, and thus largely autonomous, the Borg also unwaveringly believe that they are working towards the greater good. The Borg Queen says, by assimilating other races into our collective, we are bringing them closer to perfection. And also, they left behind their trivial, selfish lives, and they've been reborn with a greater purpose. So we could turn it around and look at the Borg as the ones who are inflated and identified with their own persona or adaptation to their highest values, perfection, order, and harmony. By disowning the parts of them that are incompatible with that perfection, they have pushed individuality and freedom into their own shadow. This is portrayed in the Star Trek Voyager episodes called Unimatrix Zero. The Borg Queen discovers a mutation in the Borg collective that affects 1 in a million drones. While these drones regenerate, which is the equivalent of sleeping, they experience their individuality and can interact with each other in a virtual environment full of trees. Upon waking to outer life on their barren spaceship, they remember nothing. So just as our shadow and other unconscious aspects come out in our dreams and compensate for our one-sided conscious orientation, so do those of the Borg. Of course, the Borg Queen sees this as a malfunction and sets out to eliminate it. We could then say that the Borg and the Federation make the same mistake. By leading a one-sided life based on the elimination of anything that is incompatible with their highest values, they each push their own shadow parts onto the other party, who is then compelled to live them out in an unconscious and autonomous way. But there's a different way of doing things, as suggested in Neumann's theories about the new ethic, and shown in the more recent Star Trek Picard series, which takes place 29 years after the conclusion of Star Trek The New Generation. At the beginning of Season 2, a new kind of Borg ship that doesn't look anything like the usual Borg cube or sphere, comes through an artificial spatial anomaly, asking to become a member of the Federation, something which is in total contradiction to the Borg's usual behavior. Then a new Borg Queen, who looks nothing like previous Borg Queens, cuts through all the fences and takes control of Captain Picard's ship and the whole fleet. Then everything goes black. When Picard and his crew wake up, they find themselves in an alternate timeline, where the Borg and any other alien races have been eradicated in the most cruel way. Instead of a peaceful federation, there's now the warring and xenophobic Confederation of Earth. The whole plot of Season 2 revolves around going back in time to change history back to what it was. To do that, Picard's crew saves the old and weakened Borg Queen from public execution, because she's the only one who can do calculations to go back in time to the moment where history was saved. So they connect the old Borg Queen to their ship and jump back nearly 400 years into the past. After this heroic feat, the old Borg Queen is hurt and unconscious, and the spaceship inoperative. Agnes Jurati, tormented scientist, allows herself to be partially assimilated in order to repair the Borg Queen from the inside and restore power to the ship. Captain Picard severs their connection before she loses herself to the Borg completely. But something happened during that brief connection. The old Borg Queen looked into the darkest corners of Jurati's deeply traumatized psyche, and she was impressed. In subsequent dialogues with Jurati, the old Borg Queen effortlessly mixes flattery and acceptance with hurtful words that make it clear that to others, Jurati will never be acceptable. These dialogues echo active imagination with a dark inner shadow figure akin to Donald Kalsched's split-off protector, persecutor, or demon, a figure said to belong to a more primitive level of ego development, corresponding to what Jung designated as the archetypal shadow, or the magic demon with mysterious powers. Kalsched calls it incarnate evil in the personality, or the dark side of the Godhead or self. The Borg correspond indeed to a much more archetypal and primitive shadow. They really do seem like the embodiment of evil. While alone on the starship, Jurati finds herself in an impossible dilemma. The old Borg Queen has used trickery to take an innocent person hostage and threatens to murder him if Jurati doesn't join her and become Borg. In true demon fashion, the old Borg Queen says, "You're alone, Agnes, in every timeline, every permutation, every reality in this universe. You are utterly alone. That is your faith, forever invisible. But I could change all of that. Imagine being loved completely, every thought and whisper cherished and shared. With our minds joined as one, we could be more. I am the only one in this entire universe who has ever truly seen you. Once I am gone, you are alone." Her whole life, Jurati has been haunted by a pervasive feeling of loneliness and longing for connection. The old Borg Queen is lonely too and has long wanted to find or create a counterpart, an equal. Jurati ends up shooting the old Borg Queen to save the innocent hostage. But as the old Borg Queen is dying, Jurati is suddenly overcome with excruciating pain. The old Borg Queen says, "That's me, dying. I'm part of you." We cannot kill off our shadow without losing a part of ourselves. She continues, "Do you like that gnawing nothingness? Because it's never leaving. Together, we could be so much more. You need me to get home. You need me, Agnes. How will you survive without me?" And she's right. We do need shadow to be whole. Finally, Jurati gives in, and the Borg Queen assimilates her. But she doesn't turn her into a drone. Because she values Jurati as a potential equal, she infiltrates her mind instead. The old Borg Queen's body dies, but her mind lives on in Jurati. Although she initially creates the illusion that Jurati is still in control, we discover gradually that her body now houses two opposing personalities. In the episodes, we can see them alternatively as separate when they dialogue and together in one body. The ongoing battle between Jurati and the old Borg Queen, between consciousness and shadow, comes to a close when the old Borg Queen mortally wounds Jurati's friend and refuses to show mercy. As Jurati regains some ego control, she starts a dialogue and negotiation with her inner shadow figure, a kind of active imagination. An important step in the individuation process takes place once Jurati stops seeing the old Borg Queen as something evil outside of herself that must be exorcised or defeated. Neumann writes, "But as the process of individuation unfolds, the ego's former drive towards perfection simultaneously disintegrates. The inflationary exaltation of the ego has to be sacrificed, and it becomes necessary for the ego to enter in some kind of gentleman's agreement with the shadow, a development which is diametrically opposed to the old ethics ideal of absolutism and perfection." Jurati now accepts that these shadow components are part of herself, and she is ready to dialogue. Jurati says, "This is the history of the Borg. Well, the only history that matters, the ending, how it always ends for you. A lone Borg slayer, a united federation, they come for your top shelf overreaching, Icarus-worthy arrogance. In this or any other universe, you always lose. That's why you fight so hard. You live with the death knell of your species across infinite timelines. You fear loss just like we do. You long for what we all long for: connection, longevity, discovery." Both the Borg and Federation function according to the one-sided old ethic, which is based on the principle of opposites in conflict. The old ethic is a partial ethic and always ends in disaster on the collective level. The Borg are eventually attacked and destroyed. But Neumann proposes another way, an ethic which is total or whole on two levels. Instead of focusing solely on the individual, the new ethic considers the larger consequences of our individual moral viewpoint for our fellow human beings and our environment in general. It also expands responsibility from conscious actions to include the unconscious, taking responsibility for our shadow. This frees the collective unconscious from having to take on and live out that part of shadow and evil. So Jurati makes a proposition to the old Borg Queen. What if we ask for it, for permission to assimilate others, you and I? The galaxy is filled with lives that need saving. What if we take this ship and build a better Borg, a real collective, based not on assimilation, but salvation? A Borg collective that embraces the uniqueness of its members. The old Borg Queen accepts Jurati's proposition, and together Jurati and the old Borg Queen become something new, something better. The crew subsequently find a way to restore the timeline and travel back to their own time nearly 400 years into the future, leaving Agnes and the old Borg Queen in the past. They find themselves back on their spaceship, face to face with the new and unusual Borg Queen, who is in the process of taking over the whole fleet. But Picard now recognizes her as the entity made up of Jurati and the old Borg Queen and decides to trust her. Jurati, as new Borg Queen, has carried out the gentleman's agreement made with Shadow nearly 400 years earlier. She has built a new and more compassionate Borg by inviting, instead of forcing, new members into their collective. She proceeds to use her control over the fleet to create a protective bubble all around them and thus save them from a surprise attack by a powerful enemy, which was hitherto unknown to the Federation. This new Borg collective thus saves the galaxy and commits to becoming a contributing member of the Federation. Neumann writes, "But the predigestion of evil, which he, the individual, carries out as part of the process of assimilating his shadow, makes him at the same time an agent for the immunization of the collective. An individual's shadow is invariably bound up with the collective shadow of his group, and as he digests his own evil, a fragment of the collective evil is invariably co-digested at the same time." The journey of a single person can have a profound impact on the collective unconscious. Agnes Jurati was haunted by the very dark aspects of her traumatized personality. But she courageously met Shadow, allowed her inside, and sat with her in dialogue and battle. And then the unthinkable happened. In her struggle and through Neumann's gentleman's agreement with Shadow, she came to create a better, more compassionate Borg. While holding the tension of the opposites literally in her body, a new possibility emerged, in line with Jung's theories on the transcendent function. Jurati took responsibility for her part of Shadow, and the collective unconscious Shadow was forever changed. I see the very idea of a new and more moderate Borg as a beautiful symbol of hope, This Star Trek Picard storyline came out in 2022. If out of our collective unconscious an image can arise of negotiation with and subsequent integration and transformation of a collective shadow that seemed so absolutely evil, unstoppable, and unredeemable, then there is hope for the society we live in. Thank you for listening.